Hello class, in this video I'll be showing you how to graph the sine function. Let's begin. So we want to graph f of theta is equal to sine theta. And before we do that, I've gone ahead and rewritten the function so the coefficients of 1 are present and we are adding 0 at the end of the function. All of that will help us be able to fill out the information over here to the left, starting with the period. The period can be found by taking 2 pi and dividing it by the coefficient of theta. So in this case, the coefficient of theta is 1. 2 pi divided by 1 is 2 pi. And that should come as no surprise because in the previous section, I talked about how the period of sine is 2 pi. Next, span of intervals. So when we graph sine theta, we're going to graph sine theta in intervals. And we want to know what the length of these intervals are. Or we want to know what the span of the intervals are. So I'm going to go over here to the right. And there is a unit circle. And the unit circle is cut up into 4 equal pieces. 4 equal pieces. And each quadrant has the same span. And that span is the distance from one axis to the next. So in this case, this span is pi halves. If I came over here to the third quadrant, the distance between pi and 3 pi halves is also pi halves. So how do we get pi halves from all of this information here? Well, if we take the period and divide it by 4, that is equal to pi halves. Next, what is f of 0? Well, f of 0 is sine of 0, and we know that the sine of a 0-degree angle is 0. Next, the key points. The key points are going to start at the coordinate 0, 0. Then we're going to move around the unit circle and go to pi halves. That is going to be the next key point, and the sign of pi halves is 1. Going to the next axis, that is pi. Sine of pi is 0. Then you have the sine of 3 pi halves, which is -1. And then we complete the revolution at the angle 2 pi, and sine of 2 pi is 0. So there are the 5 key points that we're going to start with. Finally, we have the center line, and the center line is the real number that is added to or subtracted from the trigonometric function. So the number that is added to this function is 0. So the center line is y is equal to 0. Finally, the amplitude. The amplitude is the distance from the center line to the highest point or the lowest point on the graph. It's the absolute value of the coefficient of sine. So let's take a look at the coefficient of sine. the coefficient of sine is 1. So the absolute value of 1 is 1. And now we have all the information we need to graph sine theta. And we're going to start by plotting all of the key points. So the key points of 0, 0, pi halves 1, pi 0, 3 pi halves negative 1, and 2 pi 0. Next, I'm going to identify the center line. And I'm going to place a vertical line through the first key point. None of these dotted lines are part of the graph. They're just there to help you graph the function. So since the span of intervals is pi halves, I'm going to put another vertical line through pi halves. And then another vertical line through pi. And keep going, like such. And now I'm going to graph one complete cycle of sine. If I can, there you go. So this is one complete cycle of sine in a 2 pi period. Now the graph doesn't stop at 2 pi 0 and it doesn't begin at 0, 0. Remember that the sine function is a periodic function, so this graph will continue the same pattern throughout the entire real number domain here. And that is the graph of sine theta.